All right, so our final project. Um, we're gonna we're gonna kind of step out of your comfort zone a little bit. You're gonna have the chance to really explore some wild ideas of your own device, and have an opportunity to use Grasshopper in a very free way. So this is your final. I'm calling it iconic algorithm, and what it's supposed to do is get you to think. I want you to think outside of the realm of pragmatism and really start to think about how algorithms can be used to create architecture that you wouldn't see on a day-to-day basis, right? You're not going to see a typical building in our finals at all. So we're using kind of that Evolo skyscraper prompt model, to to give us a fitting challenge for what algorithms can really achieve. What I mean by algorithms is algorithmic design, right? Setting up a set of rules that's going to help us accomplish a particular goal. So these are really inspiration images for you to get a sense of what level of magnitude I mean by iconic structures. Okay, so let's start talking about the actual project. And this is in the drive, by the way. I can't pull it up on my workstation, but if you go in our class folder and you go into projects and then project 4, the folder for project 4, you'll be able to open this in Word and PDF and take notes and mark it up, do whatever you need to do. So let's talk about it. The objective. You can read all the narrative about it. It's really just talking about how megastructures really have the opportunity to provide a lot of functions for society that are not necessarily utilized at all times, and they're sort of jam-packed with all these different possibilities. And what we're going to do is find a way to activate them, if that makes any sense. So really, we're going to take two primary functions of what a megastructure could do, and we're going to design how it can function in both ways at once. And that's just saying that's your primary objective. Then we have our actual secondary project objectives that you'll have to abide by as well. That'll clarify some of this. So what are some of the functions of megastructures? Well, the ones that I've listed out here, this is not a complete list. It's just one of the few things that we could possibly fathom as what a megastructure could possibly do, right? It's a landmark for wayfinding. If you go back to these images, you will see these buildings from anywhere within like a 30-mile radius, which is approximately your sight line across the curvature of the Earth. I think it's more like 26 miles, but anyway, you can see this from very far away. And it gives you a landmark to help orient you in space, not just in your local, like street to street, but in a regional level. You can sort of jump from landmark to landmark to landmark and never be lost, essentially. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is population density. Okay, so megastructures give us the opportunity to completely eliminate sprawl. If we were to, possibly just, bring everyone into these giant megastructures, it might not be the best, solution for certain things, but it could be a great solution for other things. And so we need to weigh those possibilities. Programmatic stacking. You can jam-pack a lot of different types of program into a megastructure. You also have the ability to develop a cultural identity. So cultural identity meaning, each of these buildings has a very different type of statement about what it is, what it represents, how it functions, and what that region is there to do, and how it's meant to function, right? How does this structure and this region contribute to the human condition? Can I get you all to stop clicking and working and looking at your screen? It's kind of important for this one. This is your final project. Okay. Another one being vertical farming. Michael Zhang. I need you to focus.
Okay.
I'm explaining your final. Okay. Vertical farming is another one. So that's a kind of a hot sort of buzzword on well, I guess kind of. It's just a buzzword. Using megastructures as a way to farm not just in the horizontal plane but the vertical plane. Energy generation, that one can go 1,000 different ways. I'm not going to go through them all right now. Something like events, so giant megastructures for groups of 100,000 plus spectators, like stadiums, for instance. Transportation. You can think of transportation as not just being in the ground plane anymore. Mass transit is not really just going to be buses and trains in the near future. And defense structures or military structures or space structures, whatever you want to think of it as, we can go there with this project. Okay, so when I say this is not a complete list, it really is truly not a complete list. Anything you can fathom as a mega structure, I want you to exhaustively think through the possibilities of how we can approach the human condition in our design. Any questions so far? Okay. Now, the process. Right here it says we're going to start with developing a design partie diagram. That means that we're going to focus on point, line, and plane. It's a diagram of the concept. So you're not going to be able to develop that right away, but that is our first primary step. So you're going to need one of those. You're also going to need to develop a series of thumbnail diagrams for how the concept may be modeled. So like we did in that exercise before where we did step by step what we're going to do to accomplish modeling a certain thing. You're going to need to pre-plan what your approach is going to be for this project. Okay? Now, you'll also need one rendering. So going back to this, you will need one iconic rendering of your project. It doesn't have to be a tower, okay, and I'll talk about the parameters of what it's going to be, right? But you're going to need one image. It just so happens that Evolo, happens to do skyscrapers almost exclusively, so they all have this form. But you can do, sprawling complexes or, amorphous sort of things. It's up to you. And you'll understand when we go through the parameters. But that's essentially all it is. The rendering, it really must communicate your solution as a standalone. So if it has to do with, if it has to do with mobile vertical farming that has zero impact in the land, like completely zero impact on the land, then that's what you can do with that image, right? That communicates that to me. I'm not going to go through the other ones, but you kind of get the idea, I think. They're really just there to inspire. But so anyway, you must have a site model, and I put that in quotes because I want you to think outside the realm of pragmatism when you think of site, right? A site model doesn't have to be that urban landscape that I gave you in the sample file the other day. A site can be anything. A site could be the sky. A site could be the ocean. A site could be underground. A site could be in space, right? There are 1,000 different ways that you can think about this. Just think about it, okay? So here are the specific objectives, and the top two are the most important. Really, if you think about it, you've got your project objective, which is kind of the overall what we're trying to do, and then I want you to look at those top two elements right there. You need to choose one of your functions and make sure that it responds to our fight or flight mechanic as human beings. Okay, so do you guys know what that is? Right, it's like a survival instinct that we have where we're either going to fight or we're going to run, right? Fight or flight. It's really the only way that humans have survived is that instinct. The other one is I need you to consider regional infrastructure, whatever that means, right? So infrastructure is a very wide term here. It could be water, it could be energy, it could be roads or airways, or how we're chaining way stations in space. Okay, think outside the box. Develop a narrative. It could be anything you want, as creative as you want, but that's what you should be focusing on most in this first phase. Any questions so far? Okay. So a little bit more specific now, and this is where you're actually going to execute your design and what you need to do. And if you think about it, this way, 4 requirements for how you design this building is really not much. You are completely unchained in this project, except I want you to make sure that you have typical floor-to-floor heights of 12 feet to 15 feet. On the same note, it doesn't have to be like exactly 12 feet to 15 feet throughout your entire structure. Wherever it goes, you can put voids in it, you can separate them, you can create sky lobbies if you have a tower. Just anywhere you have multiple floors, I want you to do 12 feet to 15 feet. Okay? It has to be a total of 700,000 square feet. And I should put a plus delta in that. I think what I'm going to call for is anywhere within 5% of that. Okay, I'll rewrite that in. I should have put it in before. Okay, so 700,000 square feet is a lot of space. Right now, you guys have only designed, a couple thousand square feet, if that. Right? You mostly do single-family housing here at our program, right? So there's a reason I did that, is because I don't want you to think about program unless it's your concept. Does that make sense? Yeah? No? Does it scare you, that number? Okay, good. It shouldn't, because really what it means is you don't really have to design an interior space at all. I just need you to mass things out. Okay? So the other thing is that the building may only engage 50,000 square feet of ground plane, and that should be in quotes too, because your building may not have a ground plane. But if it does have a ground plane, you can only engage 50,000 square feet. Does that make sense? And that 50,000 square feet doesn't have to be all in one space, by the way. So these are the rules. Take them literally. They are the only rules that you have for developing the project. And beyond that, you can develop any creative narrative that you could possibly want. Okay? Where we're going to start is diagramming. Is that clear? All right. Now, the specific objectives, which is your deliverables, that's this. You're going to need a 2-page document, 8.5 by 11. Depending on what kind of building you develop, it could be either portrait or landscape. Okay. You're really just going to need 1 sheet of sketches and diagrams and another sheet of your rendering. That's it. It's just 1 rendering and then sketches and diagrams. Not too hard, right? All right. So, and then it lists everything that you're going to need on that. Like you're going to need a particular type of sketch. I put in like that design partie sketch. That's your point, line, and plane sketch. I did put in an illustrative facade sketch. That's optional. If you want to put that in and it's helpful to you, or you do it as a part of your design process, put it in there. If you don't do that, then don't bother putting it in there. I think most of you are going to want to do that. Okay. Then you're going to need those small thumbnail sketches of your process sketches. Okay. And then finally the render. So the render just tells you that it needs to be full page, right? Zero bleed if you can. We can print it to PDF zero bleed, but if you print it out from a printer, it might not be zero bleed. But here's really the key here. It needs to be black and white, sepia or a single color filter, or a single color highlight only. Okay, that's that key requirement. So that's why I showed you all of that today. The other thing is I put a final note at the very bottom that says you may use Photoshop to its fullest extent. Okay, you can Photoshop into it whatever's necessary to communicate the idea. Okay, so where does Grasshopper come into this, right? When we get back to the images, right? These megastructures, there's one parameter, well, 2 actually. There are 2 parameters on this project that you're going to have to program with Grasshopper on the pragmatic level. You need to hit 700,000 square feet within 5%, and you must only engage a ground plane of 50,000 square feet in area. Okay, so those you're going to want to verify that with Grasshopper. More specifically, the square footage of the floor plates. But the other part is it must have a facade that's communicating something about your idea. Okay, so I don't want to just see a mass. Like this looks like it's a giant box in the bottom right, but it's not. It has structure behind it. It's very subtle, but it's there. I need you guys to think this is no longer just a mass. It needs to have some idea of a structure. And it needs to have, some conceptual clarity to it, right? So every single one of those is using algorithmic design in order to accomplish their task. Does that make sense? And you will have to do the same. What questions do you have?
I don't get the whole ground plane thing. Because you're saying some might not have a ground plane?
Yeah, I only say, most of you will. The truth is most of you will. I only say that because if somebody wants to get really crazy with it, they might not really have a ground plane. Like this building on the top right doesn't really have a ground plane, does it?
And then you said that it doesn't have to be condensed, so it's like it could be like spread apart as long as it equals 50,000?
Yep. If that's part of your design partie, sure. Yeah. So if you guys are interested in understanding like how to break down broad rules and think through a very open-ended prompt and arriving at a good solution, go through the Evola website and look at some of their past contests. You'll see a massively wide array of solutions to a very simple design prompt. So you just, the hardest part about this is going to be developing what you want to do. Like, what do you want to accomplish? So for instance, let's go into, I'm going to give you like a quick, I guess, example of how I might start to do this. One of the things that, so you've got these two parameters that you need, right? One must address fight or flight instincts, and the other one must address regional infrastructure. So when I think about a few things, we've got population density and transportation, right? They're two very interesting things because when thinking more about everything that's happening in our world today, right? I'm almost afraid to go anywhere where there's a mass of people, right? Hopefully you guys don't ever have to really feel that way, but it's just there are scary thoughts. But when you think about population density and transportation, I might be able to combine the two and think about, transportation is purely infrastructural and it brings people together because it's all based off of hubs. And so when we've got this massive transit center where everybody's coming together, what I might try to do with that is separate and not densify, is that even a word? I don't know. Not make more dense the transit center and figure out how do I get my infrastructure to be farther apart but still efficient. And I can do that through blending the different types of transportation and developing a structure that will have a series of sort of cascading scales of transit, if that makes any sense. So rather than having all of your trains pull into one spot, you might have trains pull into one spot with a series of buses that pull you, or drones that pick you up and bring you to other spaces individually or something like that, right? Whatever the case, you can get crazy with it. You could have a tower, of different ways that it can connect, but they're all different systems. Like maybe each person has their own pod that separates from this tower and brings you from place to place, and you're never really in a mass of people at all. You know what I mean? So those are the types of conversations you should be having with yourself about this and thinking about, how do I blend those things? And then you can diagram it. Did I confuse you more? Okay. No? Okay. I trust you. Yeah, I know. It's a lot to take in. What's that?
I'm thinking and it's getting hard in my mind.
Yeah. Well, don't get stuck on this list. Just think about these two operations, right? Fight or flight, regional infrastructure. What do they mean to you? What parts of those do you engage most often, right? And fight or flight isn't just physical harm. We have fight or flight mechanics just in our psychological condition as well. People who get in an argument, they are either going to argue or they're going to run from the argument, right? So maybe what it has to do is what it has to do with is what type of space is going to either facilitate or de-escalate one-on-one arguments, right? How can you do that with a space? You can do it with sound. You can do it with types of surfaces. You can do it with textural conditions. All this. Just think through a hypothesis. It doesn't have to be right. It's just something to try on. It doesn't have to. We're not going to scientifically explore everything and make sure the physics works and make sure that this thing can be built and then worry about the economics of it. I want you guys to be thinking about something that is not a physical response. Like what I mean by that is, like, you're not thinking about, oh, I've got this program, it serves this function, I need to build this type of building for it, right? I want you to be thinking about something that's a little bit more ethereal, right? Something that's fleeting, right? It's just a thought. Does that make sense? Yeah.
What do you mean by sketch? Are you talking about diagrams or?
Yes. I'll have an example for you. That's a very good question. I didn't explain that when I went through this. I'll have an example for you of that, probably at the start of next week, hopefully by Thursday if I can find time to do it. But the sketches are just like those. Okay, find a design party. It might be a little bit more complex than this series that we did, right? Like, you're not going to have a design party that's a line, right? It'd be too hard to communicate that. You're probably going to need one or two layers of something. But I want you to try to boil it down to the most basic essence that you possibly can. So if mine was cascading, and I think everybody stole my markers, but all right. So so separation and cascading, right? You try to. This is kind of my first tip, I think, is once you figure out what you want to accomplish, boil it down to a diagram. So we have separation. So I'm just going to put, like, dot and dot, right? And then we have cascading. So then that becomes my architectural language in a way, is I just try to figure out, how do I get this to accomplish the narrative of what I want to do? How do I separate and cascade at the same time? Maybe what I'm doing here is I'm creating a physical barrier between my cascades. Maybe what I need to accomplish is, maybe what I really want to do is just physically separate them entirely so that I can do this element, and then this element, and then this element. Or do they really have to be cascading this way? I mean, it could just be that I have elements somewhere in space, so it could just be a mapping exercise for where the hell they go. I don't know, right? But when you think about the separation, it could be a physical barrier, or it could not be anything physical at all. It could just be distance. And then what does that mean for the logistics, right? So if I do a physical barrier, what do I need for protection to get from one space to the next, right? Do I need portals? Do I need to have something that takes individuals up and over, right? Or do I want portals that are going to go through? That's a very different thing. So if you're going to have, well, that's getting into the specifics a little bit too much, but think about what those mean in different conditions, and eventually you're going to arrive at something that makes sense. Like, what I would think of for something like this is that's probably too dense. And so, maybe my algorithm becomes bars, right? And those bars are portals. And every portal has a different function. Maybe one of them is air, one of them is, let's call it like buses, and one of them is cars, or something like that, right? So you have all these transit pieces, but they all need to have extremely separate functions. But at the same time, you can look at it in plan. We jump up into plan. And maybe rather than having a diagram that just splits like that, you can create a vertical, kind of, or not a vertical, like a directional problem, right? You can sort of splay it out so that when things are coming in, they're only briefly touching each other, right? Like it's this ever so slight. I'm drawing two diagrams on top of one another, but separation can be this ever so slight connection between different systems so that density happens only at one time. Right? Maybe density only happens in that one moment where they just ever so slightly kind of, touch down with each other and then split apart again. Right? It's, if I look at that design partie, I think that it accomplishes a thing, a little bit of what my objective was, right? Because I have to move these logistics through a particular place, but I'm trying to keep them as separate as I possibly can. Does that make sense? It doesn't have to be right. It doesn't have to be fully baked. We're gonna have time to work through it in all that kind of detail, but go through a couple of diagrams, sketch them out, think through the narrative. If you need to, write a narrative about it, and then arrive at an idea that is at least halfway baked. Does that make sense? So at the same time, maybe that's not happening. That's looking at it in plan still, but that doesn't have to happen just in plan. It could happen, like you could have these things sort of separating in elevation the same way. So that if you look at that in elevation, they're sort of coming in. Right? Do you want them to be these separate physical barriers? Do you want them to, kind of go off somewhere else? And if they do go off somewhere else, what are they going to be? You can go 1,000 different ways with it. Just pick a direction and go with it. Okay? Do I think this is the most profound design idea ever? No. But I just came up with it in 5 minutes, and that's what I want you to do. Maybe it was more like 10 minutes. Did that confuse you even more, or was that helpful? Okay. What other questions do you have?
It could be just simple, right?
What's that?
It could be pretty simple, right?
Yeah. The diagram is simple. I don't need anything more than, something like that, something like this, something like that, or like this for now. This is getting a little bit more illustrative than I would prefer. If you do something like that, I would suggest maybe you just go with a line, something like that. Try to keep it to point, line, and plane. Okay? Keep it simple. Do it fast. Don't worry too much about whether or not it's right or if it's compelling. I just want you to brainstorm. Does that make any sense? It's going to feel weird. What? Yeah, it's going to feel very weird because you guys aren't used to this. You're not used to being totally unchained. The reason I'm totally unchaining you is because we've got to do this fast. I don't want you to get hung up on all of the specifics of a project. I just want you to think of something that's compelling, like to you personally compelling, and then you're going to develop something that makes it a beautiful thing. Make sense? Any other questions? Yes?
Is the structure going to be one building, or can it be like two pieces that correspond with each other?
That's up to you. So kind of like this, where this center diagram I just drew, that's sort of leading us in the direction of having separate buildings. So maybe our transit centers are totally separate from one another. Maybe each transit center is built for one person. And if it's built for one person, how frequently do you need them? What do they look like? How do you get there? So maybe like one of the interesting ones. Wow, this video is getting long. One of the more interesting ones from Evolo. I forget what it was called, so it might be hard for me to find it. But it was like this network of structures across the Earth. I might not be able to find it this quickly. Yeah, I probably should stop the video, huh? All right. Well, anyway, it doesn't have to be just one. That is a few. I guess that kind of gets to the idea, is that maybe your structure is a series of structures and a network of structures. Kind of get that? Yeah. Okay. So there's not going to be a huge design critique part of this. It's kind of whatever you want it to be, it can be that. And it doesn't have to be the perfect solution. I just want you to have an inkling of where you want to take something and then take a stab at it. That's all we have time for, because this is a design charrette. Okay? All right, so I'm going to stop this thing because it's now a half an hour long.